Is first to Mr. Gentile. With respect to documented immigration, the waiting period to reunite with family abroad takes 5 to 20 years under the current immigration system. What would you do to decrease the backlog faced by residents in your district waiting to reunite with family members abroad?
Well, first, let me say thank you to all the groups that organized this forum here today, and certainly we need to do more of these in our neighborhood up here, particularly in Bensonhurst. But thank you all for coming, and for the groups that organized this here today. Now, I don't have to wait for translation, right?
Right, no, it's
So,
simultaneous.
simultaneous translation. Okay, great. Well, certainly, I think the fact that we have this backlog in immigration, and the fact that the country over these years have grown more and more frustrated over the immigration system is exactly why the president took some action, and the president issued his executive order. And if for nothing else, his executive order will prompt, or at least he's trying to prompt, the Congress to get involved and to come up with a comprehensive immigration reform. And so I applaud the president for his action, because if we continued on this road, nothing would have happened. And right now, even though there's a legal challenge to the president's action, the fact is he acted because of that. Let me just say that for those who are having those backlog problems in this district, it's the same across the city, across the country. We need to come to that streamlined system toward immigration, and add federal money to the immigration process, so that we have more people. I think my mic, oh there. So that we have more ability to process those types of applications as quickly as possible. So it's a matter of having priority on immigration and the resources that we need to meet the problem.
So the problem with immigration needs a total reform in this country. What they're doing right now is they're trying to put immigrants against naturalized citizens in many issues. And the current laws are just really restrictive against families and communities. And they're just set to tear apart neighborhoods, and in our country and in other countries. And I would work tirelessly to make some serious change with our immigration laws, because there's no reason why families should be separated for longer. You know, if you want to have like a year, for example, as the minimum, that's the most it should be denied reunion. Just do whatever processing, but we need to make some serious change with immigration.
It would be nice to know what our other major candidate has to say about immigration, but obviously he's not here. And certainly hearing from him would be instructive, I would say, to all of you who are very, very concerned about immigration.
And I realized that I failed to point out that we are going to end up with closing statements from both of the candidates. And I do want to remind everybody in the audience, turn off or silence your cell phones.
Next question will be by Grace Shim from Mingfang, and it will be directed first to Mr. Lane.
Mr. Lane, too many undocumented immigrants live in fear every day that they will be deported and separated from their families. We need a strong immigration reform with a path to citizenship that will allow them to come out of the shadows. As congressman, will you stand up and vocally support immigration reform with a path to citizenship?
Yes, I will strongly stand up for that, because as I mentioned before, immigration, it's a human right for people to be naturalized in this country. If people are here for a set amount of time and they're contributing to the community and they're, you know, doing everything they do, they deserve the right to be naturalized in this country. One of my biggest concerns right now is actually for international adoptees. International adoptees are people that are adopted from other countries by American parents, raised here. but they don't go through the extra step to actually make them naturalized citizens. So then what happens is those children are growing up in fear about being, persecuted by our current immigration law.
Well, as we've been saying, it's the American dream to become, part of the American dream is to become an American citizen. And it's an American tragedy if we were to tear families apart by taking parents who might not be here legally in the first place, but having children who are American citizens, and taking that family unit and tearing it apart. And that's why I support what the president has done, because that his action on deferral addresses that very issue about keeping families together and giving those parents who might be here illegally a deferral in order to get on a track for citizenship. So, absolutely, I believe that immigration reform is essential, because the other option is deportation that will tear families apart.
Next question will be by Steve Chung, directed first to Mr. Gentile.
Okay, the 11th congressional district contained a large and increasing number of immigrant and limited English proficiency residents. Name some specific action you will take to make your office service accessible to those who are limited English proficiency residents.
Great. Well, Steve, I think I mentioned this yesterday when we spoke. The good news is I'm told that Congress members get to have a large staff, right? So, and so what I hope to do and plan to do is focus most of my staff in the district, in Brooklyn and in Staten Island. And using that ability to have a large staff, I want to be able to have people on staff that are representative of the immigrant population that we have in the district. And so we have the growing Chinese, Asian population. We have even some Russian population that's growing in Staten Island. And certainly we have the more traditional populations that have been here for many, many decades. But I think what I need to do first is, when I put my staff together, is to have a staff that is representative in this district. It's good to have policy people in Washington, but here in the district, you really need to have people who are representative of the immigrant population that we have here. So that's the very first step that I would take.
Definitely. The real thing is, when you're elected to Congress, yes, you're working in DC, you're representing the people, but you do need to have solid base in your community. You cannot represent the people fully if you're not really working with the community. And what I'd like to do is have a place in Brooklyn, have a place in Staten Island that'll also serve as the community meeting spaces. So if there's any issues that are currently happening in your community, you can bring them to us. And in those situations as well too, we're going to talk about additional resources you need. If you need more multi-language translators for anything that's going out, or even printed materials, or anything with the community should be addressed in the congressman's local districts.
Next question is by Abir Kamas from the Arab American Association of New York, directed to Mr. Lane.
Hi, Mr. Lane. So the Arab and Muslim community in CD11 has been subject of widespread surveillance by the FBI and by the police, the local police force, for the years following 9/11, and it's still continuing until today. As a representative of the largest Arab community in New York City, do you support the government's surveillance programs? And secondly, if you were elected to Congress, how would you protect the Arab and Muslim community in your district from racial profiling?
Well, this is a big part of my platform, actually. I do not support what the government's doing. The government not only spies on Arab communities, they spy on everybody. And it's all part of their game to use the fear mongering of terrorism and whatever. And it needs to stop. And it even happens at the local levels with our law enforcement. Our law enforcement right now is using their power to put people of color and poor people into their place and it's not right. And these are the kinds of things I would definitely change. I don't feel that anybody should feel threatened for just being who they are in this country.
I was the local councilman during the time where some of that was happening in our district. And certainly, I brought that to the attention of Police Commissioner, at the time, Police Commissioner Kelly, and questioned him when he came into a City Hall hearing. And certainly, I said to him that there were standards that I thought, there were standards established by a court that I thought that the police department was not following, particularly in the cases that involved the surveillance in Bay Ridge, and that that had to stop. Now, as a Congress member, if I find that that has continued in our neighborhood, then I would clearly would agree to do some statutory work in the federal government if necessary, if those standards are not upheld. So, so in this case, you not only use your bully pulpit, but you could also use your power as a legislator too.
Next question is by David Lee from Grace, directed to Mr. Gentile first.
Thank you, Councilman.
It'll go back on.
Okay. Well, Councilman, low-income and working-class immigrants and their families find it very difficult to afford college and to pay for college tuition. What's your plan to help students obtain a college education without crippling debt? In other words, how will you make college education not a privilege for the rich, only for the rich you can pay for?
Yeah, that's, David, that's becoming more and more of a problem for middle-class families sending their children to college. Today, I could not afford to go to the college that, excuse me, that I graduated from back in 1981. I could not afford to go to that college today. And that's a shame, because that's the case with many families, middle-class families, who can't afford to send their children to college. So I have a plan that I think will stem the tide of rising tuition rates, skyrocketing tuition rates. And what I would propose to do as a member of Congress is to make colleges share the risk in federally subsidized student loans. And right now they don't share that risk, and so it doesn't matter to them how much debt students walk out with and whether or not those students can actually pay that debt. And so, whether a student defaults on the debt or not doesn't matter to the college. They don't have a skin in the game. If we make them take part of the risk in the default of loans, then they might think twice about setting tuition rates so high that students have to take out so much debt that they might default. And would also make sure that students, colleges make sure that students get jobs after they graduate so they don't default on loans. So I think we have to, what you say is, make the colleges have some skin in the game when it comes to student loans.
Very good.
Yeah, so this problem that you're talking about is a problem with our higher education system as well as our overall education system. Right now, we look at it as a way for some profit margin for people so right now we're looking at students that want to better themselves by going to college and for the hopes of getting a better job. But the realistic part of it is that these banks are the ones that are really profiting from this whole scenario. If you go to a college, you're faced with paying off a loan for like 30, 40, 50 years of your life. And that shouldn't happen. So one of the things I would propose is we need to do something with our tax structure. We need to reform our tax structure right now. The corporations and the 1% in our country are not paying their fair share of taxes. And if we were making them pay their fair share of taxes, that would be enough to have a public education system, a quality public education system, so that none of us would have to worry about paying these high tuition fees and going into a lifetime of debt with these banks. So that's what I would do.
I'm still paying my college loans.
Oh my God.
And I've been out almost 30 years.
The
interpretation is dependent on your using the microphone.
Oh, okay.
So do you want to repeat your answer, Joanne,
All right,
just for the...
I'll do the short answer. So yeah, so if we were to tax the corporations and the 1%, what they should be taxed. For example, if I'm getting $100, I have to pay $30 in taxes. A corporation currently is getting $100. They pay $3, maybe, if that much. We need to tax the corporations and the 1% fairly. That will be enough money into our surplus to fund our education system, to fund our healthcare systems, to fund so many problems that we have right now. That's a short answer.
I have a
There's a
follow-up.
Okay.
This is related to education. Specialized high schools of New York City. Stuyvesant High School is 75% Asian. How would you affect change? What changes would you affect to the admission policies to increase diversity at these schools?
Follow-up to both.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think the specialized high schools have done a great job, and certainly I think the standards need to stay high. We need to keep high standards in the specialized high schools, because that's the reason why they're specialized, because of the high standards that they set. Now, so I think the standards are good standards. So to increase the diversity, you have to try and do some more preparation at the lower grade levels throughout the city. I think the problem is we give up on areas of the city and those students who live in those areas, and as a result, those students are not prepared to take the specialized high school test. And so that is a fault of our system. And what we need to do is to better have preparation at the lower grades across the city. Do not give up on neighborhoods. And when you don't give up on neighborhoods and you help those students to prepare and learn, then you'll get the diversity. The reason we don't have the diversity now is because we've given up on neighborhoods in the city.
Yeah, definitely the diversity issue. So, education starts at before childbirth. I mean, I remember reading to my son while he was still in my wife's belly, and we believe that reading starts early. Like I said, education starts early. The love to learn has to start earlier. So by the time we get to college, the children are more rounded in the things they want to do. And right now, what we have in this country is we have these standardized tests. And kids are freaking out about these standardized tests because they're looking at that. If I don't get a high grade on this test, I'm going to get left back, or there's all these high stakes associated with this test. And that's not what education should be about. Education should be about making you a better person, making you someone that contributes more to the community, making you do whatever you want to do. And the diversity is Stuyvesant High School. I went to High School of Art and Design, and so when I was in junior high school, I was looking at all the different high schools, and I wanted to go to either Bronx Science or Stuyvesant, but at the same time, I wanted to do something more on the artistic level. So everyone should be able to have that same choice. And right now, with the diversity issues, it has to start in the community. A lot of the people in the community, they're just trying to survive. They don't even think about education. They're just wondering if they're going to be alive the next day because it's that scary out there. So it's a big answer.
Next question is by Joanne Yu from Asian American Federation, directed first to Mr. Lane.
This is the follow-up to the racial profiling and police relations question. I think obviously you mentioned communities of color being impacted. Race relations between communities of color and law enforcement has certainly been on the decline, and it's been playing out in a very ugly way nationally. What are your views, and what do you think the federal government's role is in improving local police relations, local relations between all communities, but specifically communities of color, to prevent racial profiling and police brutality?
Well, my campaign is calling for independent investigation and prosecution of all these police brutality cases. Eric Holder just did a study. The community in Ferguson was saying, we have an issue here, and nobody listened to them. So then Eric Holder finally did an investigation and said, oh yeah, you're absolutely right. These investigations can happen so much sooner. In New York City, for example, we have a civilian complaint review board. and people are always going to there and talking about these issues, but nobody takes it to the next level. The public advocate doesn't do anything, and we need to make some serious laws about if you have X number of complaints about a precinct, we need to send some people in there to investigate that precinct, send an independent investigator to look and see what the issue is there. And you know, a lot of these problems start at the head. They think it's the bad cops at the bottom. It's actually the bad cops at the top that start this thing. And that's where we have to start. So for example, with our Chief Bratton, he should never have come back to New York City. He was the engineer of a lot of things that have created problems back when he was doing quality of life issues with Rudy Giuliani. I had been stopped and frisked numerous times during that time, and you know, this is all just a symptom of what happens when you have someone at the top that's making really bad decisions for everyone at the bottom.
Certainly, we do have now an independent investigator. We have created within the last year a police inspector general, and that position is intended to be an independent investigator on the police department. So that still has to play itself out, but that is now a statutory element built into the system. So that is seeks to address that issue. But certainly, we now also in city government, city council, would require the police inspector general to report to the city council on a regular basis on the types of investigations and ultimate prosecutions that they have, so that we, as the legislative body and the city council, can see the patterns that might be happening, and as a result of those patterns, take some action. So we're about to do that in terms of requiring the police IG to have a regular reporting and interaction with the city council. But moreover, when it comes down to really building trust, you know, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King once said that we may have all come here by different ships, but we're all in the same boat now, right? And that's what we all have to realize. We're all in the same boat now, we're together, and we need to understand and respect each other, and that's what we have to work toward.
All right. A clarifying question. Talked about the community's role and the city council's role. What is the role of the federal government in improving relations between the local police and minority communities? And we'd like to give you 30 seconds each to answer that question, and start with Mr. Lane.
You know, the federal government, they can set the laws at the highest level possible. You know, just like we have the Supreme Court that has these laws, you know, we can have these laws that says, you know, if you're operating your law enforcement within this country, these are the laws you have to abide by. You cannot interrogate people unjustly. You cannot hold them, you know, without having any charges against them. These are all basic things that we want in this country. We don't want to be intimidated by our police. We pay for our police.
I think a federal government could certainly restrict, to the extent of even prohibit, the type of militarization that the local police departments have now seemed to trend toward. And that's something that could be addressed on a national level through the federal government. I think also on the funding end, I think the federal government, through Congress appropriations, can help fund the police body cams that are expensive, but they, I think, help to allay suspicions that.
Time's up. Thank you.
Next question is by Abir Kawas from Arab American Association of New York. I'm sorry, excuse me. Next question is by Susan, and it's directed to Mr. Gentile.
So, candidates, if elected to Congress, what will you do to diminish the impact of big money in politics, so that the voices of everyday New Yorkers, those who can't make big campaign contributions or hire lobbyists, are still heard in our democracy?
Well, certainly, having been a candidate for federal office, getting small donations, I certainly would underscore the fact that big money should not have the place in our system the way it does. And under Citizens United, making corporations people that can give to candidates is ridiculous if you think about it. So I would advocate for legislation that would, in effect, reverse Citizens United, so that it would not be, you would not have that kind of influence in our system. And also, I think, to some extent, establishing somewhat like the city has in New York, not a 6-to-1 system, but some kind of limits on what can be given by certain entities. And I think that will go a long way. If we could do away with Citizens United and establish some limits on entities, I think would go a long way.
So I'm a Green Party candidate, and one of the things about the Green Party is we do not accept any corporate donations, because we know the problem that once you have a corporation donating to a candidate, then they're beholden to what that corporation says. And we believe that elections and campaigns should be funded by the public. The government should actually handle how much a candidate gets. Because even within New York City, we're talking about the Campaign Finance Board with a 6-to-1 match. There's a lot of restricting limits with that. I did this in 2013. I was going to try to go for it. But for me to qualify in the Campaign Finance Board, I would have need to raise $100,000. If I could raise $100,000, I don't need the campaign finance matching program. That's the problem. So what we need is a truly public funded electoral process where you don't have candidates going against, going to BP and trying to get their money and going to JP Morgan Chase and getting their money. They should just be funded directly from the public.
See, this is where it'd be very interesting to have the Republican candidate here and answer that question, because it would be a very interesting answer, but he's not here to answer.
And now we're going to have the lightning round, and it gives you an opportunity to jot down your own questions. At the end of the lightning round, people will be at the end of rows to pick up your questions. So you've got little sheets, and please think of questions that you feel we haven't covered yet. And we're going to ask the candidates and remind them it's tempting to talk back to the panelists. Do remember our audience is here. So the first question on the lightning round.
The way we're working is I will address it, the first one to Mr. Gentile, and then Mr. Lane will respond, and then the next question, it'll be the reverse, okay? So just alternate, all right? Okay, first question, lightning round. Did you attend public school?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you support term limits for congressional seats?
Yes.
Undecided.
Did you publicly support including the Muslim holidays in the public school calendar?
That's what you gentlemen.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have an IDNYC, a municipal ID?
Not yet.
Did
Not
you
yet.
Wait, sorry. Good. Yeah.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Do you plan on getting one?
Yeah. Having many forms of ID, I don't necessarily need one.
It's a yes or no question.
Okay. Well, it's no at this point. No.
Yes.
Mr. Lane, did you publicly support including the Lunar New Year holiday in the public school calendar?
I didn't know about it, so I have to say no, but I would, so it would be a yes.
Absolutely.
Mr. Gentile, are you proficient in another language other than English?
Very little in Chinese. Daja.
My Chinese is ni hao, and my Korean is annyeonghaseyo, kamsahamnida, shomannyo, and
Yes or no?
I forgot the question.
Yes, that's the problem. Are you proficient in another language other than English?
Well, so I don't know if that's...
That's a yes or no?
I'll say no.
Mr. Gentile, when is the last time you were in a mosque?
It was about 2 weeks ago.
No, I haven't been.
Mr. Lane, do you support a woman's right to have an abortion?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Gentile, do you support making voter registration automatic for all eligible voters?
What do you mean by automatic?
Same day registration for all?
No.
Anybody who is eligible does not have to register, or the registration happens automatically without the voter having to do something.
As long as they're eligible, yes.
Yes.
Do you, had your campaign posted, oh, no, wrong question, sorry. Name 2 establishments on 86th Street where your campaign has put posters up.
We haven't put posters up yet in this area. We did Staten Island though.
I believe they're up and down 86th Street, so it would probably be one of the phone stores and probably one of the candy stores on 86th Street.
And one lightning round question to clarify some earlier answer. Will you affirmatively commit to hiring bilingual district staff?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
So, if you haven't had a chance to pass your own questions to the end of the row, we're going to ask the staff members who are here and volunteers helping. Audience, please pass your questions to the end of the row so that we can collate them and ask them. And now we're going to go back to the panelists' questions.
Next question will be by Abir Kawas from Arab American Association of New York, addressed to Mr. Lane.
So just this past week, there were large protests all across the country, actually, to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Given the increasing wealth inequality in the U.S., what would you do in regards to workers' rights?
Right. Well, yes, that's one of the biggest parts of my campaign, and I was actually at those protests as well. And I believe that the federal minimum wage from $7.25 should be increased to $15 now. And especially in New York, for example, I think each state should be able to adjust the minimum wage even higher depending on the cost of living. So in New York State, it should be $20 because there's no way that someone can survive with a $15 minimum wage in New York. It would be $30,000 a year. And after taxes, you know, there's no way that they can afford for rent and food and transportation and healthcare and childcare with that. So.
Well, certainly the $7.25 an hour, which is the federal minimum wage, which our Republican candidate just found out the other night, there was $7.25 for the first time, by the way, is certainly not a livable wage for anybody in New York City. People with full-time jobs are still having hard times making ends meet. So even the New York minimum wage is not enough. We need to raise it. The president has said we need to raise it immediately to $10, and then I say within a year or two raise it to $13 and tie it to inflation. And that's really the only way that we can bring wages up while allowing businesses to adjust to the increasing minimum wage. Because when you raise the minimum wage, you also have the people having more income and more ability to be consumers when you have a higher income. And having ability to have more consumers helps small business. So we do it in a gradual way, but do it $10, then $13 within a year or two, and tie it to inflation. That's my proposal on minimum wage.
Next question is by Joanne Yu from Asian American Federation, directed first to Mr. Gentile.
You know there was going to be a housing question, right? The National Housing Trust Fund is expected to provide a block grant coming through HUD. If Congressman, how would you, what would you do to promote fair housing and ensure that New York gets its fair share of resources, as well as preserve and create affordable housing, especially in your district.
Well, certainly, I think the mayor has done a lot of good work in trying to get affordable housing, but certainly a grant program from the federal government, there would be no better place than New York City for that much of that grant money to come to produce the affordable housing